What would you do if your loved ones suddenly stopped answering their phones? Would you assume they were busy? Would you brush off the silence, telling yourself everything was fine? Or would that nagging voice in the back of your head start to whisper, something isn't right? For the Ivancic family, that silence would become deafening. It was late December 2019 when concerned relatives contacted police in Tarpon Springs, Florida. They hadn't heard from Richard Ivancic, his wife Laura, or their adult son Nicholas for days. Calls went unanswered. Texts were met with silence. Something felt wrong. When officers arrived at the modest Florida home, they had no idea they were about to walk into a scene of pure horror. The moment the front door swung open, the stench of death hit them like a wall. Inside, they found three decomposing bodies, each one showing clear signs of violent murder. The once warm family home had become a house of death. But it wasn't just the murders that unsettled the officers, it was what surrounded them. The house was still decorated for the holidays, Christmas lights still twinkling, a fully decorated tree standing in the corner, presents neatly arranged underneath. A plastic Santa Claus figurine smiled from the fireplace mantel, frozen in time. But there was no holiday cheer left in this home, only death. This wasn't a burglary gone wrong. It wasn't a random attack. This was personal, calculated, intentional. And most chilling of all, this was just the beginning. Who would kill an entire family just days before the new year? What could possibly drive someone to commit such an unthinkable act? As police carefully combed through the crime scene, something immediately stood out. One person was missing: Jamie Ivancic. Jamie, the 21-year-old daughter of Richard and Laura, should have been home for the holidays, but she was nowhere to be found. Her car was gone, her phone was silent, and when detectives tried to contact her, nothing. At first, there was hope maybe Jamie had escaped. Maybe she had fled the house before the killer arrived. Maybe she was out there, scared, waiting to be found. But then detectives realized something else. Jamie hadn't been seen in months. No one had spoken to her. No one had physically seen her. They had only received texts from her phone, short messages, vague excuses, just enough to keep people from asking too many questions. Then another unsettling realization: Jamie's husband, Shelby Nealy, was also nowhere to be found. Was Jamie on the run with Shelby? Or had she been his first victim? Why would a killer stick around when they've already gotten away with murder? While detectives worked to understand what had happened in Florida, a new lead emerged, one that would take them hundreds of miles away to Ohio. Someone was actively using the Ivancic family's credit cards. At first, authorities weren't sure who was making the purchases, but security cameras at gas stations and stores provided an answer, and it was the one name they'd already been looking for: Shelby Nealy. When police tracked him down and arrested him in Ohio, they expected to find Jamie, but she wasn't there. And then Neely said something no one was prepared for. Jamie hadn't disappeared. She wasn't missing. She was already dead, and she had been for almost an entire year. Had Neely murdered his in-laws to cover up another crime? When detectives confronted him about the deaths of Richard, Laura, and Nicholas Ivancic, Neely didn't hesitate. He admitted to killing them. But then he dropped a bombshell. Jamie Ivancic, his own wife, was already dead. She hadn't gone missing. She hadn't abandoned her family. She had been murdered almost a year earlier, and yet somehow Neely had managed to make everyone believe she was still alive. For nearly 12 months, he had played the role of Jamie, controlling what her family saw, what they heard, and what they believed. The Ivancic family had spent a year texting a ghost. But how? And more importantly, why? How do you hide a murder for an entire year? Most killers try to distance themselves from their crime. They flee, they destroy evidence, they hope to avoid suspicion. Nealy did the opposite. He didn't just kill Jamie, he stole her identity. He kept her phone. He continued texting her family, responding just enough to keep them from getting suspicious. If they asked to see her, she was busy. If they asked to call, she was tired. If they asked where she had moved on with her life. And they believed him. For nearly a year, Nealy controlled the narrative, manipulating Jamie's loved ones into thinking she had simply cut ties. In reality, Jamie was lying in a shallow grave right in their backyard. She had been feet away from the home Nealy continued to live in. And yet, no one suspected a thing. Until December 2019, when the entire lie came crashing down. Why did Nealy kill his wife? When investigators pressed him, Nealy finally confessed. He admitted that he had bludgeoned Jamie to death, claiming it was a fit of rage. But was it really? Or was this something far more premeditated? Authorities quickly realized that Nealy's story didn't add up. If Jamie's murder had been impulsive, why go through such extreme lengths to cover it up? Why continue texting her family for months? Why murder her parents and brother a year later just to keep the secret hidden? Was Nealy really a man who lost control, or had he been planning this all along? Had Jamie ever stood a chance? Why go back and kill the rest of the family? Most killers commit one murder and then do everything they can to avoid detection. They cover their tracks, they run, they hide. But Nealy? He did the opposite. After getting away with killing Jamie, he waited almost an entire year before striking again. Why? Because the lie was falling apart. At first, texting Jamie's family was enough, but as the months dragged on, her parents grew suspicious. The excuses were starting to sound thin. They wanted to see her. They wanted to hear her voice. And Nealy knew he couldn't keep up the charade forever. If they kept pushing, they'd find out the truth. They'd realize Jamie was never coming back. And once that happened, Nealy would be exposed. So he made a decision. Instead of letting the truth catch up to him, he decided to erase it entirely. In December 2019, he packed his bags, drove to Florida, and walked into the Ivancic family home with one goal in mind: to silence everyone who could expose his secret. He didn't just kill Richard, Laura, and Nicholas. He methodically eliminated them one by one, ensuring that no one would be left to uncover the truth. And for a brief moment, it worked, until his own greed got him caught. Did financial struggles push Nealy over the edge? When Nealy was arrested, he didn't deny the killings, but he did try to explain them. According to him, the murders weren't about rage. They weren't about some deep personal vendetta. They were about money. Nealy was broke. He had no job, no savings, no future. For months, he had been living off Jamie's money, draining her bank account while pretending she was still alive. But eventually, the money started running out. He knew that if Jamie's family discovered the truth, they'd cut him off completely. He'd be exposed, arrested, locked away. So in his mind, he had one option left: eliminate the only people who could ruin his plan. Kill them, steal their money, buy himself a little more time. But does that really explain what he did? Would that alone be enough to murder an entire family in cold blood? Or was the truth much darker? How many people did Nealy fool? It wasn't just Jamie's parents and brother. It wasn't just her friends. It was everyone. For nearly a year, Nealy lived a lie. He dodged questions, he manipulated, he controlled the story. He even tricked his own children. Jamie and Nealy had 2 young kids, and for months, they had no idea their mother was already dead. Neely woke up every morning, looked his children in the eye, and pretended nothing had happened. How does someone do that? How does someone tuck their kids into bed at night, knowing that they murdered their mother? Was Neely a man driven by desperation? Or was he simply a cold-blooded killer, one who never truly cared about the people he destroyed? How did police finally catch him? Neely had spent months covering his tracks, spinning an elaborate web of lies and deception. He had convinced Jamie's family that she was still alive. He had gotten away with murder not once, but 4 times. But in the end, he made one fatal mistake. He got greedy. Instead of laying low, instead of disappearing into the background, Neely did what so many killers before him have done. He kept using his victims' credit cards. At first, the purchases seemed random gas stations, small stores, nothing that raised immediate alarms. But as investigators began connecting the dots, they realized that every single transaction painted a trail leading directly to him. They followed the money, and the money led them straight to Ohio. By early January, police had enough evidence to track Neely down. And when they finally caught up with him, he was calm, he was collected, and he didn't even bother to deny what he had done. But the question remained, would justice really be served? Because after everything he had done, after 4 brutal murders, a year of deception, and the destruction of an entire family, Neely thought he had found a way out. Would the justice system let him get away one last time? Would Neely finally pay for what he had done? The moment he was taken into custody, prosecutors wasted no time. Neely was officially charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Jamie, 1 for Richard, 1 for Laura, and 1 for Nicholas. With a case this strong, there was no doubt if he went to trial, he would be convicted. The only real question was, would he face the death penalty? Neely had spent years manipulating and deceiving everyone around him, but now, for the first time, he was out of options. And he knew it. What do killers do when they know they're caught? They bargain. They negotiate. They do whatever it takes to save themselves. And that's exactly what Neely did. Rather than risk a trial and the possibility of a death sentence, he pleaded guilty, admitting to all 4 murders in exchange for a life sentence. He confessed to killing Jamie. He confessed to murdering her parents. He confessed to eliminating Nicholas. But there was one thing he never did: he never apologized. Did Neely ever feel guilt, shame, regret? Not even for a second. According to prosecutors, Neely showed no emotion during his confession, no tears, no hesitation. He coldly described each murder like he was reading from a script. Jamie, he hit her over the head, buried her body in the backyard. Her parents, her brother, he walked into their home and methodically wiped them out. And as he told his story, he didn't flinch. It was just facts to him. No remorse, no humanity. What does justice even look like when the victims are already gone? By the time the truth came out, Jamie's entire family had already been murdered. There were no grieving parents left to fight for her, no brother to demand justice. The only people left were her children, 2 innocent kids who would never see their mother again. And worst of all, the man responsible for their pain was the same man they had called Dad their entire lives. What happens when a killer is your own father? Neely and Jamie had 2 young children who had been raised by the same man who murdered their mother. For nearly a year, Neely had tucked them in at night, made them breakfast, played with them all while knowing their mother's body was buried just feet away. The truth shattered everything. The children were immediately placed in protective custody, removed from Neely's reach forever. But no court ruling could erase the damage he had done. They would grow up without a mother, without grandparents, without an uncle. and with the knowledge that their father had taken everything from them. Would life in prison be enough punishment? Nealy would never walk free again, that much was certain. He was sentenced to life without parole, ensuring that he would die behind bars. But was it enough? For many, justice meant the death penalty. They believed Nealy deserved to suffer for what he had done. But by pleading guilty, he had avoided that fate, securing himself a life sentence instead. A small victory for him, a bitter pill to swallow for everyone else. Were there warning signs before Nealy killed Jamie? Looking back, some people wondered, was this avoidable? Had Nealy shown red flags before? Had Jamie ever felt afraid? There were no documented reports of abuse before her murder, no police calls, no protective orders. But does that mean she wasn't in danger? Or does it just mean that no one saw the danger in time? Most killers leave something behind, some trace of remorse. But Nealy? Even in prison, he never once expressed guilt, never wrote a letter of apology, never spoke of regret. His crimes weren't spur of the moment. They weren't acts of desperation. They were coldly calculated. He had lied, manipulated, pretended to be a grieving husband, a loving father, a normal man. But in reality, he was a predator, one who had never intended to stop killing. What do we learn from a case like this? That sometimes monsters don't look like monsters. Sometimes they live among us, hiding behind the mask of a father, a husband, a family man. Nealy was never the grieving widower he pretended to be. He was a killer all along. And by the time the truth came out, it was too late for the Ivancic family. But one question still lingers. Could he have been stopped sooner? Could this happen again? We like to believe that killers stand out, that they look dangerous, that we'd recognize them if they were close to us. But this case proves otherwise. Shelby Nealy wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some shadowy figure lurking in the dark. He was a husband, a father, a son-in-law. He sat at family dinners. He laughed. He played with his children. And all the while, he was harboring a deadly secret. So the real question is, how do you spot a killer hiding in plain sight? Were there signs that people missed? Could Jamie's family have noticed something was off sooner? Or was Nealy always destined to kill no matter what? One thing is certain, some killers don't wear masks. They pretend to be the people closest to us, and that's what makes them the most dangerous of all. What do you think? Could anyone have stopped Nealy before it was too late? Or was this horror story always going to end the same way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.